Emily Harper had always wanted a calm life, especially after moving to Seattle to heal from a painful breakup, and she believed her new job at a small publishing company would finally give her the peace she needed, until Daniel Carter, the new author the company had signed, walked in and quietly disrupted the balance she had fought so hard to build. From the moment she first saw him, his calm voice, warm smile, and polished wedding ring, Emily sensed trouble she never asked for, and yet something about him drew her attention before she could stop herself. Daniel wasn't the type of man who tried to be charming, but his presence felt gentle, familiar, and inviting, and Emily noticed the way he remembered small things about her coffee order, the way she tapped her pen when she was thinking, how she liked sunlight by her desk. She told herself it meant nothing, but deep down she knew most coworkers weren't this observant, especially not married ones. Daniel often stayed a little longer after meetings, sometimes pretending to fix his notes or ask simple questions, but Emily could always see the real reason in his eyes. He just wanted those few extra minutes with her. She tried to ignore the growing pull between them, reminding herself again and again that he had a wife named Claire, a life outside this office, a ring he wore every day, but Daniel somehow kept appearing in her day in small, unexpected ways that made her heart stumble. He would walk by her desk only to say something funny, offer to help with manuscripts that weren't his responsibility, or ask how she was doing with a softness that felt too personal for two people who were supposed to be nothing more than coworkers. Emily didn't want to encourage anything, so she kept a polite distance, answering briefly, working quickly, avoiding long moments of silence, but Daniel always managed to break through her defenses with small, thoughtful gestures. One quiet evening, long after most employees had gone home, Emily stayed to finish editing a book for a deadline, hoping to enjoy the stillness of the nearly empty office, until she heard soft footsteps and looked up to see Daniel standing by her door. The building was almost dark except for the warm desk lamp beside her, and the moment she saw him she felt her heart tighten with a mix of worry and something she didn't want to name. "You're still here?" he asked softly, stepping closer, his voice lower than usual, making the quiet room feel even heavier. She nodded and kept her eyes on the manuscript, trying not to let her thoughts wander. Daniel walked closer, pulling a chair and sitting on the other side of her desk, as if he had every right to be there. "Emily," he said, and the way he said her name made her realize how much she had started to care. "You make my days feel different." Emily's breath caught, and she looked away quickly, knowing the line between right and wrong was getting blurry. "Daniel," she whispered, "you shouldn't say things like that." His expression softened, regret mixing with sincerity. "I know," he admitted, "but I can't seem to help it." She could feel the weight of the moment pressing between them, a moment she didn't want but couldn't walk away from either. Emily wasn't someone who enjoyed risky feelings. She had been hurt before, lied to, left behind, and she promised herself she would never fall into a situation that could harm someone else. But Daniel wasn't acting like a man who wanted to harm anyone. He looked like someone carrying emotions he didn't understand, someone trying to find clarity in the wrong place. As he leaned back slightly, watching her with quiet intensity, Emily's heart reminded her that feelings often appear without permission, but choices always belong to her. She knew she needed to stop this before it went too far, before either of them said something they couldn't take back, but before she could find the words, Daniel stood up slowly, walked to the door as if he were leaving, and then paused. Looking back at her with a troubled expression that told her more than any confession could. "I didn't plan to feel this way," he said quietly, almost to himself. "But I can't deny it anymore." She didn't respond, not because she agreed, and not because she disagreed, but because the room suddenly felt too small for the truth hanging between them. Then, without another word, he walked out of the office, leaving a silence that felt louder than any conversation they had ever shared. Emily sat there, staring at the manuscript she could no longer focus on, realizing that something had shifted, something she couldn't undo, and as she closed her laptop and turned off the lights, she whispered to herself that she needed distance, clarity, and strength. But the next morning, when she walked into the office hoping things would return to normal, she froze the moment she saw Daniel standing by her desk, waiting, watching, and clearly unable to stay away. And Emily, despite every warning her heart whispered, knew deep down that this was only the beginning of a complicated story she wasn't ready for. After the evening when Daniel lingered too long in Emily's office, the days that followed felt like a delicate trap neither of them wanted but couldn't escape. Daniel started showing up more often, always with excuses that seemed innocent on the surface, questions about manuscripts, discussions about publishing strategies, or even simple comments about the weather. But Emily noticed the pattern, the way his presence made her heart beat faster and her thoughts scatter. She told herself repeatedly that they were only co-workers, that he had a wife and she had no right to be part of his life, yet each small interaction pulled them closer, making it impossible to maintain the boundaries she tried so hard to keep. One rainy afternoon, he invited her to walk with him to a nearby cafe after work, claiming he needed fresh air and someone to share ideas about a project. But Emily felt the tension between them growing with every step, aware that this walk was more about emotional connection than any professional need. The rain fell softly, tapping on the umbrella above them, as they spoke about everything except work, revealing childhood memories, hopes for the future, fears, favorite books, and secret little habits they never shared with anyone else. Emily felt herself opening up in ways she hadn't with anyone in years, and she realized how dangerously easy it was to care about him, to trust him, to enjoy his company. Daniel, meanwhile, was struggling with the weight of his own life. His marriage to Claire had become routine, distant, and quiet, lacking the warmth he found in Emily's presence, and yet he felt guilty even acknowledging it. "Does your wife ever get jealous?" Emily asked cautiously, curious but hesitant, fearing the answer might destroy what little peace remained in her mind. Daniel lowered his gaze, fidgeting slightly with his hands, and admitted that he and Claire hadn't talked like they used to, that their lives had drifted apart, and that spending time with Emily made him feel alive again, seen again, in a way he hadn't realized he was missing. Emily's chest tightened at his honesty, knowing this was exactly the kind of confession that could change everything, that could turn a simple friendship into something far more complicated. And yet she also felt a strange sympathy for him, understanding that human connections sometimes arrive at the wrong time or with the wrong person. She reminded herself gently that he had a life, responsibilities, and commitments outside her own, and that her role in this story should not become the cause of heartbreak for anyone, least of all herself. But Daniel's presence was magnetic. Every glance, every subtle gesture, every quiet laugh made the line between right and wrong blur. And Emily noticed herself imagining moments she shouldn't, feeling warmth where there should have been caution, and longing for attention she tried not to crave. The conversation at the cafe deepened their bond. They laughed, shared worries, and even allowed small silences where no words were necessary, only the comfort of being near someone who understood them. Emily felt conflicted. Part of her wanted to pull away before emotions ran too deep, and another part of her wanted to stay, to feel the comfort of someone who saw her fully, not the version of her that always appeared strong and composed at work. Daniel's honesty about his marriage complicated everything further. He wasn't seeking Emily to replace Claire, he claimed, only to find a sense of clarity and connection that had been missing. But Emily could sense the vulnerability in his words, the tension between desire and duty. At one point, Daniel reached for his coffee, paused, and glanced at her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. And she realized that their attraction was mutual, subtle but undeniable, creating an emotional storm neither of them could ignore. Emily tried to steer the conversation back to safe topics, mentioning a book project and talking about future deadlines, yet Daniel always found a way to circle back to personal moments, sharing small details about his day, family, and life philosophy, making it impossible for her to remain indifferent. She felt a strange mix of exhilaration and guilt, knowing that each smile they exchanged, each story they shared, was building a bond that could lead to heartbreak if mismanaged. By the time the rain had stopped and they returned to the office, the emotional distance they once maintained had evaporated, replaced by a fragile connection full of questions and silent confessions. Daniel lingered at the elevator, watching her as if he feared leaving, yet knew he could not stay. "Emily," he said softly, "I don't want to stay away." His words struck her with clarity. This was no longer casual, something had shifted in both of them, an invisible tether that neither reason nor moral logic could easily sever. Emily nodded slightly, her own emotions battling with her desire for stability, aware that giving in to feelings could make them vulnerable, yet she also understood that denying connection might hurt them both in ways they could not anticipate. She realized that Daniel was not malicious, nor was she, but the situation was becoming dangerously emotional, creating tension and longing neither of them could fully explain or control. On the walk back to her desk, Emily felt the weight of every glance, every step, and every unspoken thought between them, knowing that they were both moving towards something uncertain, a precipice where desire, responsibility, and truth collided. That night, she returned home with a restless mind, thinking about his eyes, his words, the way he laughed softly at things only she could find amusing, and the strange comfort of feeling understood by someone outside her normal circle of life. She knew boundaries had been crossed emotionally, if not physically, and feared what might happen if Daniel continued to appear in her life with such honesty and vulnerability. Yet despite the worry and inner conflict, a small part of her hoped he wouldn't stay away, because in his presence, the world seemed lighter, more alive, and full of possibilities she had not allowed herself to imagine for a long time. That night, as Emily lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she acknowledged the truth: she cared for Daniel more than she should, and the feelings were growing, unpredictable and uncontainable, and she sensed that neither of them would be able to return to the way things were before this connection deepened. And just as she began to imagine how to keep her distance, her phone buzzed. Daniel had sent a short message, almost casual, asking if she was free tomorrow to discuss the manuscript over coffee, and Emily realized, with a mix of fear and anticipation, that the next chapter of their story had already begun. Emily didn't expect him to come that night, not after all the tension between them and the careful distance she had tried to maintain, but when a knock sounded at her apartment door, her heart froze, and she realized that Daniel had followed her home, standing there in the rain with a soaked jacket and a face full of conflict, and the sight of him made every caution she had tried to uphold crumble instantly. "Daniel? What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly as she opened the door, feeling the warmth of the apartment clash with the chill of the night, unsure whether to be angry, scared, or relieved. He hesitated, staring at her with eyes that carried exhaustion, guilt, and longing all at once, and he spoke softly, almost brokenly, that he had had a fight with Claire, that he had walked out because he couldn't face pretending everything was normal, and that he needed someone to talk to, someone who understood, someone who was her. Emily stepped back, trying to create space, aware of the danger of letting him into her private world, knowing that emotions could escalate in moments like this, yet feeling an undeniable pull to comfort him, to listen, to be the person he needed, even if it hurt her. Daniel's words were full of honesty and pain. He admitted that Claire had asked him if he cared about anyone else, and he had been forced to confront the truth about his feelings for Emily, and in that admission, Emily felt a mixture of shock, fear, and an emotional connection that was far deeper than anything they had shared before. She knew that she could become the reason for a fracture in his marriage, that her involvement could bring pain and misunderstanding, yet she also understood that he wasn't malicious, that he was struggling with emotions he hadn't anticipated, and that her role could be one of support without crossing the line into something destructive. Daniel remained standing in her doorway, drenched from the rain, and Emily noticed the trembling in his hands, the way his voice softened when he admitted he had never felt this seen or understood before, and that every word he said made her chest tighten as she wrestled with the undeniable attraction and emotional intensity that had been building between them for weeks. She tried to speak, to tell him to leave, to remind him that he had a life outside her apartment, a wife who needed him, and responsibilities he could not abandon, but before the words fully formed, Daniel whispered that he didn't want to leave, that he wanted to stay, that being with her, even in a conversation, even in a moment of shared vulnerability, was the only thing that made sense to him right then, and Emily felt the weight of the moment, realizing that this was no longer a casual emotional connection, but a turning point that could change both their lives forever. She placed a hand on her chest, feeling her heart race, and reminded herself that she could not be the cause of someone else's heartbreak, that she had to protect both herself and Daniel from choices that might seem right in the moment but destructive in reality, and yet she could not deny the comfort his presence brought, the way he looked at her with honesty and raw emotion that no one else had ever offered. They stood there in silence for a long moment, rain dripping off his hair, the apartment quiet except for the soft sound of the city outside, and Emily felt her emotions collide: sympathy, longing, confusion, and an undeniable spark that made it almost impossible to enforce the boundaries she had tried to maintain. Daniel finally spoke, voice low and sincere, admitting that he had said things to Claire that night, confessed truths he had hidden for months, and realized that the only way to face his life honestly was to confront his feelings, including the ones he had for Emily, and she saw the pain in his eyes, the struggle between desire and responsibility, and knew that this man was caught in an impossible position, torn between love, loyalty, and his own heart. Emily's own feelings were equally conflicted. She cared for Daniel, she had grown to admire and understand him in ways no one else could. Yet she knew that any decision they made in that doorway could have consequences she was not ready to face, and so she spoke softly, telling him to leave, not because she didn't care, but because she wanted him to choose what was right for himself, for his life, for the marriage that still mattered despite its cracks. Daniel's gaze lingered on her, full of pain, regret, and longing, and he asked what he should do if he couldn't fix things, if the truth of his feelings was too strong to ignore, and Emily responded with quiet wisdom, saying that the only way forward was honesty, not betrayal, and that whatever he decided, it should not be because of loneliness or temptation, but because it was the right choice, even if it hurt. He took a long breath, closed his eyes, and nodded, understanding that she was right, that he had to face his life honestly, and for the first time since she met him, he stepped away from her, truly stepping away, leaving the doorway open, the apartment quiet, and Emily standing there with a mixture of relief, sadness, and unexpected clarity. That night, as she watched him disappear into the darkness of the rain-soaked street, she realized that emotional bonds could be powerful, that longing could be intense, but that self-respect and moral clarity could guide people through even the most difficult of temptations, and she felt an unexpected sense of strength in knowing that she had helped him confront a painful truth without compromising her own integrity. Over the following days, Emily reflected on the encounter, the vulnerability he had shown, the confessions, the intensity, and realized that their connection, though real and deep, was a test of boundaries, of character, and of choice, and she knew that she had been a witness to a pivotal moment in his life, one that would shape both of them forever. The emotional storm that had raged in that doorway had passed, leaving behind understanding, maturity, and the quiet realization that love and attraction, though powerful, could not override responsibility and honesty, and that stepping back, though painful, was often the bravest act of all. She also realized that Daniel was not gone from her thoughts. The memory of that night, the truth of his feelings, and the subtle warmth of his presence would stay with her for a long time, a reminder that some connections are unforgettable even when they must remain unfulfilled. By the end of the week, Emily had regained a sense of calm, a renewed perspective on emotional boundaries, and a quiet pride in having navigated one of the most intense moments of her life with dignity and compassion, knowing that Daniel, too, had the chance to make choices that could heal rather than harm, and that their story, though unfinished, had taught them both lessons about desire, honesty, and the complexity of the human heart. And as she closed her eyes that night, she understood that sometimes, letting go, guiding someone to do what is right, and standing firm in one's own integrity can create a quiet, lasting impact, more powerful than any fleeting moment of passion or temptation could ever achieve. Emily Harper felt a strange mix of anticipation and dread as she opened the door to see Daniel standing there once more, drenched from the rain, his eyes heavy with emotion, and she realized instantly that this night was different from all the others, that whatever happened now could change everything between them forever, yet she also knew that she had to be strong, to think clearly, and to guide him toward the right choice without letting herself get lost in the intensity of their connection, and even though her heart beat fast, she took a step back and spoke with a calm voice, telling him that he needed to go home, not because she didn't care, but because she wanted him to face his life honestly and take responsibility for the marriage he had committed to deal with the struggles he couldn't ignore, and to understand that true connection required integrity, not escape. Daniel's face softened as he listened, a mixture of relief, sorrow, and admiration crossing his features as he admitted that he had been lost, confused, and caught between feelings he couldn't control and obligations he couldn't abandon, and Emily noticed the trembling in his hands, the vulnerability in his voice, the tension in his shoulders, all of which made her heart ache with compassion and something more, A deep understanding of the man she had grown to care about over the past weeks, yet she also realized that caring did not mean giving in, that loving someone sometimes meant stepping back and letting them make the difficult choices themselves. She reached out gently, placing a hand on his arm, feeling the warmth of his skin, the quiet tremor of his body, and whispered softly that he needed to repair what was broken, not because of her, but because of truth, honesty, and the life he had promised to build with Claire. And Daniel listened, his breathing slow, his eyes locked on hers as if searching for permission, forgiveness, or confirmation that choosing the right path could still be the right choice even if it hurt them both. Emily nodded, feeling tears prick her eyes, knowing that they had shared something profound, yet acknowledging that it was not meant to continue in the way they both might secretly wish, and that their connection, though genuine and deep, had to serve as a lesson in patience, morality, and understanding the limits of desire. Daniel finally took a deep breath, exhaling slowly as though letting go of weeks of confusion, admitting quietly that he had feared losing himself, losing his sense of honesty, and perhaps losing Emily too, and Emily responded with a soft smile, reassuring him that stepping away was not a defeat, but a courageous act, a decision to face reality rather than flee from it, and she felt a sense of peace in being able to guide him without compromising her own values or emotional health. They stood there for a long moment, the rain outside fading into silence, the city lights casting soft reflections on the floor, and Emily realized that this moment, though painful, was a turning point for both of them, a chance to rebuild trust in themselves and in the decisions that shaped their lives, while also acknowledging that emotional honesty could create a bond strong enough to survive separation. Daniel nodded, his expression showing relief and gratitude, and he finally stepped back, acknowledging that he would return to Claire with a commitment to repair their marriage, to communicate openly, and to rebuild the love and understanding that had slowly faded, and Emily felt a mixture of sadness and pride, understanding that letting go had been the bravest and most loving choice she could make, for both of them. Over the next weeks, she focused on her work, her routines, and her own healing, yet Daniel remained in her thoughts, not as a source of pain, but as a reminder of emotional truth, courage, and the depth of human connection that does not always need physical fulfillment to leave a lasting impression. She reflected on their conversations, the confessions, the vulnerability, and the moments of quiet understanding, realizing that love could be powerful, transformative, and pure even when it required patience, self-control, and moral clarity. Emily occasionally heard from Daniel in short, respectful messages, simple updates about the projects they had worked on, always professional, always kind, and she noted the subtle difference in his tone, calm, grounded, and honest, which reminded her that he was making the right choices, that he was learning to balance emotions with responsibilities, and that their story had evolved from temptation to mutual respect, emotional growth, and integrity. Months passed, and one day Daniel visited her office, not to linger, not to tempt, but to offer a simple, heartfelt thank you, and Emily smiled softly, understanding that this gesture was full of closure, maturity, and the quiet beauty of a connection that had changed both of them without destroying either of their lives, and she realized that emotional honesty, courage, and compassion could leave a lasting impact even when desire had been present. They shared a final moment of quiet understanding, a glance filled with recognition of the journey they had shared, the lessons learned, and the emotional bond that remained even as life moved forward, and Daniel walked away, finally at peace, leaving Emily with a sense of relief, clarity, and the knowledge that choosing the right path often required sacrifice, patience, and strength. That night, Emily reflected on the months of emotional intensity, the challenges, the longing, and the heartache, and she felt a quiet pride in herself for holding boundaries, guiding someone to face truth, and understanding that love, when handled with integrity, could transform people without crossing dangerous lines, and she smiled, knowing that both she and Daniel had grown emotionally, matured, and learned the value of honesty, patience, and respect, and that their story, though no longer a tale of longing or temptation, had become a lesson in the power of emotional connection, responsibility, and the courage to choose what is right even when the heart wants otherwise. By the end of the story, Emily understood that real strength was not about holding someone close against their will, nor about giving in to desire, but about helping people see truth, make the right choices, and grow into better versions of themselves. And Daniel, now calm and committed, had found a way to repair his life while cherishing the lessons Emily had given him without letting passion blind him, leaving both of them with emotional closure, wisdom, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that love, honesty, and integrity could coexist even when temptation and longing had once threatened to consume everything.